super helpful to us. So welcome to the IIIF community call. We're just after the top of the hour, so we'll get started. My name is Josh Hadro. I'm the managing director of the IIIF Consortium. I see a lot of, or many new faces here, folks who may not have been on a IIIF community call before, so I'll just briefly say that we try to do events like this roughly monthly. We feature new tools, new workflows, new demonstrations of interesting and amazing implementations. So this month we're really excited to have the folks or some of the folks behind Tropy. So I'll let them introduce themselves more fully in a minute, but Douglas, Johannes, Sylvester, yeah, and they're here. I think we'll do as we usually do, maybe 20, 25 minutes of demonstration and a view into what they've got going, and then we can have some discussion and take it from there. But as usual, feel free to use the Zoom chat, put questions in there, and I'll kind of help facilitate some of the discussion after we do the demos. Before we dive into it, I guess I just want to touch on a few announcements. Oh, actually, before I forget, would anybody be willing to take some shorthand notes? I can also help, but when I'm talking, I don't want to try and type and talk at the same time. So is there anybody, maybe a longstanding IIIF community member, who'd be willing to help jot some notes in the document as we go? The classic wait, awkward pause. All right, I will try and take some notes, but if anybody is willing to kind of help backfill as we go along, and this will be recorded as well, and we'll put the link into this document afterwards as well, but it's sort of nice to have some summary notes. So I will try and do some of that as we go. Oh, Ben, I see in the chat you've offered. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much, Ben. So it looks like we have slightly too large a crew. I don't think we will go through and do individual introductions. It's great to see all these folks here. If you want to introduce yourselves in the chat, that's great. We love to sort of see where folks are coming from in different institutions, or also I'll say adding your name to that sign-in document. I'll paste it one more time. That's just, as I said, really helpful for us to get a sense of where folks are coming from and the interest they have in institutional connections. So besides that, just a few announcements from the IIIF community side. We have our IIIF annual conference is coming up pretty soon, in a little bit less than 2 months. I'll put the link in the chat here. Our annual conference is being held in Naples. It's really exciting. We have 2 full days of conference, as well as a workshop day prior to that, and a showcase day meant more for locals in who are local to the Naples area, Italy, and maybe the surrounding countries. And that's on Monday, June 5th, and the conference itself is June 7th and 8th. So registration has been open for a little while. We've published the full program. It's available at the link I just put there in the chat. One other thing I'll mention is if you had registered early on in kind of the early bird phase, we have now published all the workshops that are available on the workshop day. So it's very easy to update your registration and go back in and add one of those free workshops to your schedule. But do please do that so that we have a sense of how many folks we will have in each room for those different workshops. And otherwise, the other announcement I will touch on briefly is the IIIF implementation survey. So this is a semi-informal but a regular thing that we've done in the IIIF community to get a sense of the different technologies that people are making use of, the different APIs that people are using, whether they're using the content search or authentication APIs in addition to the presentation APIs. Really eager to find out what the predominant image servers are that people are using institutionally, how they're generating manifests. So all of that, we've made this survey hopefully pretty easy to fill out, nothing too extensive. but we ask for your help in filling that out or passing it along to someone at your institution or at any number of institutions who might have that information. And we're hoping to present kind of the early results of that implementation survey at our annual conference in Naples in June. So I've put the link in the chat there. It's also available in the agenda as well. And we'll be sending it out in our newsletter and on the IIIF Slack as we start promoting that in the coming days. Before I kind of hand it over, let me pause real quick. Are there any community announcements or events or any other implementations or anything else that folks want to mention before we dive into the bulk of this community call today? Give it another second. All right. By all means, feel free to add links in the chat if there's anything folks want to bring to the attention of the community. Otherwise, thank you all for joining. We have the rest of the hour basically to dedicate to Tropy and some of the interesting things. I know it's been developing a lot and some interesting since I first played with it. Some interesting IIIF integration with a plugin. So I'll hand it over to Douglas, and maybe you can introduce folks and take it from there, and then we'll dive into discussion after the demo.
Sure. Thank you very much, Josh. So before we begin, really quickly, I'm going to put some more links into the chat. These are just some resources that that may be useful for if you're new to Tropy and you want to learn a little bit more. If you want to download and play along as the demo unfolds. But I put some links to our website as well as to our documentation and YouTube channel, which can really give you a lot of what you need to start working with Tropy immediately. Also a link to our support forums where we have an active community that is frequently bringing questions, troubleshooting, features requests to our attention, and also our social media and my own contact information. So yeah, why don't I start introducing myself? My name is Douglas McRae. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. And I am one of the education and outreach coordinators for Tropy. And I'm going to be kicking off this demo. Also taking part in this demo, we have here Sylvester Keel and Johannes Kurtek, who are respectively the lead developer and product designer for Tropy. They are both joining us from Vienna, Austria. And also on the call, we have some other members of the Tropy team. We have Caro Appleby, one of the developers on the project based in the UK, and Anita Lucchesi, who is the other education and outreach coordinator based in Luxembourg. So yeah, that's the Tropy team in a nutshell. Actually, the only person we don't have here is the Tropy creator and principal investigator for the project, Sean Tacketts, who's also based out of Luxembourg. So some of you may already be familiar with Tropy. You may have already used it in projects of your own, but just to give a quick overview, Tropy was created at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media, first released in 2016. And currently it's developed between CH&M and the Center for Contemporary and Digital History at the University of Luxembourg, and Digital Scholar, which is the nonprofit corporation that administers tools like Zotero, Omeka, and other open source digital tools with which you may be familiar as well. So Tropy is kind of part of that same family. Tropy is funded by the Mellon Foundation as well. It's funded by a generous support from a Mellon grant, and has gone through several significant updates, of course, since that release in 2016. So if you haven't used it in a while, there are lots of interesting new features and improvements that you can observe. So, but what is Tropy? Tropy is a digital tool for organizing archival research photos. It was created with the idea that the contemporary researcher who's going to the archive frequently is taking lots of photos with a digital camera or with a smartphone, and it can be very challenging to later organize those photos in a way that make them easily discoverable and useful for research projects. So Tropy seeks to alleviate this problem. And I should mention as well that not only does Tropy, of course, work with photos taken with digital cameras, but also frequently in Tropy projects, we see digitized images from digital repositories being imported into these projects as well. So yeah, it's something that's geared at typically at individual researchers looking for solutions to organizing their research photos using software that really understands the images that they're taking are meant to be sources, and giving researchers tools to edit, annotate, and analyze those materials. So what I'd like to do in this next part is share my screen with you and just give a little bit of an overview of kind of the way to begin a project in Tropy and the kind of the conventional way of importing images. And after this, Sylvester and Johannes will take up explaining the IIIF manifest import plugin and showing how that works, and from there opening the discussion about the way that this works with Tropy and the ways that it could be improved and the like. So when you open Tropy for the first time, you're prompted to create a new project. I'm going to call this the IIIF community call demo. Create a project, and you choose where on your local computer you want to save that project. So kind of the collection of images and data that's connected to them is called a project within Tropy, and that's what I'll be referring to in this section. So when you open a Tropy project for the first time, you've just named it, you will see a screen that looks like this, a window that looks like this. And really the first thing to get started with a Tropy project is to begin importing images. And there are different ways that you can do that. There's a menu option to import photos. Let's say, for example, I want to import photos that I have from my own archival research. Typically coming back from the archive, a researcher, who has uploaded those photos to their cloud folder or to their local drive, will encounter a list, kind of a sequential list like this. And what Tropy will help with is being able to make kind of sense of these images that are arbitrarily named. So you can select, any number of images in a variety of formats. These happen to be JPEGs, and import them to begin the project as well. You can also drag and drop directly into this first window right here. And from there, you can begin working with the images and organizing them. So the first thing you'll notice when I click on some of these images, freshly imported, that on the right hand side of the window, you will see a pane that we call the metadata panel, and this is where you can quickly begin sort of filling out some of the key metadata properties of your documents. In particular, kind of overarching categories like the archive, collection, down to identifiers like box and folder. This is something that allows, that can allow researchers to very quickly, once they've imported something, to be able to put the name of the archive, where they, or collection that they're working with. So I'm just going to put, this is from my own dissertation research. I'm just going to put a really quick name and the name of the overarching collection. So when I select all of these items, all of these items now have these different metadata fields filled out. So Tropy allows you to start describing your research relatively quickly once you get everything, once you get images imported. Other kind of simple editing tools that you can do right off the bat. It's easy to select a group of images, and rotate them so that they're the correct orientation. It's also possible to take individual images and combine them into a single merged object, which is useful. For example, if you have, within a series of images, you have a report or a multi-page letter or some other type of document that is kind of best understood when the individual pages or folios are combined. So for example, if I select all of these images, I recognize these just come on a visual level that it's a report. I can right click and from the context menu, select merge selected items. And then this item right here is Tropy now considers it kind of one object that all the metadata that I edit for it, all the notes that I make on it are all go to that one particular object. So yeah, these are some of this is how you can sort of immediately begin working with importing images and working with them. The other thing that I will say about importing images into Tropy, when you import an image into the default project type, what we call the standard project type, Tropy makes a copy of the original file and puts it in the project folder. And so Tropy immediately it will fetch that image and display it when it's imported into the project. So any kind of edits or annotations that are made to Tropy photos, they actually do not affect the original, and all of that data it's simply saved within the project file. So that's something to keep in mind about images that are imported into Tropy. These are not the original images that are working with. They are just kind of fetched thumbnails of those images. But the difference here is I'm attaching metadata, notes, annotations to these images as well. So that's typically how a Tropy project starts. Very quickly, you can begin to organize large amount, the hundreds of photos that you might take in the archive over a day or 2 days, and very easily begin to search within those using, for example, the search bar, search within those metadata terms, search within your annotations. You can also choose where we see here kind of the gallery view of kind of the more visual view of the different documents. You can also go into a more kind of list view where you can select the different columns, metadata fields that you want to kind of organize the different columns. And with more description, of course, that would be much more interesting and much different ways to organize, but just to give you a sense of how the interface works just after importing. Okay, so now I'm going to pass the presentation to Sylvester and Johannes, who will be talking about the IIIF manifest import and the way that it works in a Tropy project. So hang on one second, let me disconnect and go ahead whenever y'all are ready.
Okay, hello everyone. Johannes and I will now show you how the IIIF manifest plugin works in Tropy. I'll just share our screen here. Right, so okay. So normally if you want to install a plugin into Tropy, you can go to Tropy's website and take a look at all the different plugins that are available. So for example, here I'm selecting the IIIF plugin, and that just takes us to the GitHub page where you can go and download the latest release of the plugin. And then in Tropy, you go to the preferences window, and in the plugins pane, you can install new plugins. Here we have the IIIF manifest plugin. So with all the plugins, you can create different instances or configuration sets for each plugin. In case of the IIIF manifest, there is not much at the moment that you can configure, but I can give it a name. So I want to use this to import IIIF manifests. Here. And once the plugin is installed, it gives me this option in the import menu to using whichever name I picked to select IIIF manifests. Now, of course, you first need to get a suitable manifest. Here we picked an example from the Cambridge University Library. If you download the manifest file, and at the moment you have to save it, there's no way to copy it straight into Tropy. Once you save the manifest, then back in Tropy you can import the file. Let's see where it is. Here. And once you import the manifest, Tropy will download all the images that are present in the manifest. And as you can see, it creates a single item at the moment for each manifest. And in the item, you have then all the individual photos. Okay, this is. As you can see at the moment, or since Tropy is mainly about working with metadata, the trickiest part of the import plugin for us was to decide how to handle the metadata that is present in the manifest. Of course, the purpose of the presentation API is presentational purposes, and so for this reason, as you know, we have to work with mostly with these label value pairs in the metadata list. And as you can see, when I imported this, I got some of the metadata here, but not everything. So the question is, how can I select, or how can I map the different metadata pairs to properties in Tropy? And the way that the manifest plugin at the moment solves this is using Tropy templates, and we'll show you how to create one. Basically, what we want to do is we want to create a mapping that, for example, maps the material label to a certain property, which is then used in Tropy. And to do this, we go back into the preference window and select the templates pane. And here I can just create a new template. And here now I would decide which property I want to use. For example, I want to import Dublin Core Creator. And in the in my particular manifest file, the creator is labeled as authors. So I would use this label in my template. Now, to speed this up a little bit, we prepared a full template for this particular, for the Cambridge University Library. As you can see here, we have the DC creator mapped to the author's label. And in my plugin configuration, I can now select this template. And let's now try to import the manifest a second time. Just one moment. Again, I go to import and select my plugin and pick the right manifest file. And now I imported the same item again a second time, but as you can see on the right, we have more metadata fields filled out now. And one of the nice things about this approach is that we have exactly the same labels that were used by the particular manifest. And of course, I can, once the import is done, I can of course go into the item and work with it as I would with other Tropy items. For example, here I could take the description and add it to the note field, because it gives us the opportunity to use rich text and things like this. I can add tags to my item, for example here. Of course, I can also use Tropy's image tools to change, for example, edit the filters that are applied to the image, for example, to improve legibility or something like this. And I can also make or create new selections. And then if I want, I could add metadata to these as well. Right, I think this concludes the tour of the plugin. Maybe a few words about the current limitations. As I mentioned before, at the moment, the plugin creates one item per manifest. Of course, that's something that you might want to change if you have a manifest that is really a collection of different items. The plugin, I think, when we added it, we implemented the version 2 of the presentation API, and we kind of wanted to wait if there was demand for anybody using version 3. So that's something that we'd be happy to look into. And yes, first of all, we're happy to be able to present the plugin to you today. And we would also like to use this opportunity to hear from the IIIF community if there's anything or any use cases that they see that Tropy could be useful for in terms of working with IIIF. One idea that we had was to use the Tropy's image viewer, or to turn it into a full-fledged IIIF client, and then only use Tropy to add metadata to an existing or to remote images. Yes, so we are here and we're looking forward to hearing your questions.
That's wonderful. I don't know, Douglas, you wanted to add anything after that, or should we just move right on into questions or discussion?
Yeah, let's just move right into questions and discussion.
Fabulous. Well, let me just say thank you for that demo. That was really helpful to see, and the mapping is there's a lot of possibilities there. So I have questions, but mine I'm sure are not interesting. Let me just kind of reiterate the questions from the team, or what comments, questions do folks have about this functionality, about future potential? What would you like to see? And we'll open up the floor here. And I think we have few enough people. You can just unmute, and if it gets really fast and furious, we can try raising hands. But for now, I would say just unmute.
Hello. As my role as note taker, when you're talking about importing things from a collection in a manifest, well, my question is, do you currently support collections or collection manifests?
Yeah, at the moment we do not. So at the moment, each manifest is interpreted as a single item. Or let's put it this way, in Tropy, we have these different levels. We have the item, we have photos and selections. And I think it's very similar, especially to version 3 of the presentation API. And at the start, we found it difficult to find a generic way to basically serve all purposes. So we figured it would make more sense to start with the approach that each manifest is a single item, and then just collect all the images that we find in it and add those. And then maybe add a variation of the plugin, or just as a configuration option to allow users to say, no, I want this manifest to turn into multiple different items. So that's something that isn't solved at the moment.
What I actually meant was a manifest in IIIF is also indeed one item usually, but there is also this concept of a collection, which is a slightly different type, but it can, a collection is a list of manifests. So
so yeah, we don't support that at the moment.
Okay, yeah,
this would then turn into multiple items.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
And export.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, so that's also something we had in mind. Tropy also has a built-in API. So one of the ideas that we had was to make this API compatible to the image API, but then we thought, or it didn't really seem to us that this is very useful would be very useful. So for example, you could use an external IIIF viewer to view images which are in Tropy, but I don't think it serves a good purpose. To export an item as a manifest might make sense, but I'm not sure what the API would be for the images themselves. So it would, of course, would be very easy to create a manifest with all the metadata that we have in Tropy and have a structure, but we wouldn't have a IIIF endpoint to fetch the images from. Although we could provide one, it's just it didn't really seem all that useful to us. But if it would be, then that'd be great to hear. It's something we could look into.
And to answer the second part of the question, I'm much better at answering questions that don't have to do with IIIF, at least compared to Sylvester and Johannes. But the second part of the question, if you print an item to PDF, does it come with the rich text description too? yeah, when you print an item, or you export, you can print, or you can use, there's a export option in the, if you right click and use the context menu, the accompanying metadata and notes by default print with the exported PDF as well. And there are options to toggle that on and off, or to select only fields with that are filled in to print with the item. But that rich text description, what we call the notes field, that does print with the item. So, and of course, that can be useful for in a lot of different cases, for sharing individual items with colleagues, patrons, etc. But yes, that does print with the PDF.
If I may, I have another question. I know that Tropy also supports exporting to Omega S, or at least it did. So I feel like the use case of exporting items from Tropy as IIIF could be solved using Omega S. But then my actual question is, does Tropy store the canvas URIs so that if you create selections in your items, in your photos, well, selections in your items, and you annotate those, or you add rich text to them, that you could export all that work and maybe also the tags as annotations on the original manifest? That would be awesome.
Yes. That's an interesting idea. We currently don't save the information other than the URL itself. But that would be, maybe that would be the use case for exporting the manifest and keeping the original structure intact and just adding information to it. Yeah, at the moment, the plugin doesn't create selections. It only looks at all the images and fetches those. But again, that's one of the things that we looked at and thought it's something that we could add to if you have coordinates inside one image, to create the corresponding selection in Tropy. And yes, that's an interesting idea just to make sure that I understood it correctly, but you would sort of keep the original manifest and then add metadata that was added by Tropy and export it this way, so that you would still have the original IIIF image URLs in it, but with the extra metadata.
Yeah, actually, I feel like one of the core use cases for researchers that I talk to, that I feel I've been using Tropy for years, and I've recommended it to a couple of researchers as well. And we've been using IIIF, of course, for years. And one of the main use cases that I feel IIIF and Tropy combined could serve is that you annotate images from manifest, and well, for some projects we've been using Mirador version 2 and annotating I don't know, individual letters in or well, they're not letters, individual hieroglyphs with their meaning. And if you can import the images through a manifest into Tropy and do all that annotation work offline within Tropy, it would be relatively easy if you could export all those notes, as they're called in Tropy, as annotations in the IIIF world.
Excuse me, is that are the annotations part of version 2, or were they added in version 3?
They're in version 2 as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so an image is painted onto a canvas using an annotation already, and then there's the you can annotate basically anything onto a canvas together with the image.
Yes, and that sounds like an interesting idea. Thank you.
I see a thumbs up, and I know other folks have mentioned similar use cases. One thing I'll just offer sort of offline after this, Glenn Robson, who's the IIIF technical coordinator, couldn't be here because he's handling another call at the same time. But if it would be useful to you to learn more about kind of the basics of annotation and how that might work in Tropy, we'd be happy to follow up with you and talk through that. Yeah, just let us know. I see another question from Tracy in the chat asking about recognizing metadata embedded in images. And Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you thinking like technical metadata or IIIF data that is already embedded in there potentially?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I'm thinking about cases where we're getting images directly from photographers and looking for ways to. They certainly already have metadata in those images.
Yes, Tropy extracts some metadata on import. The way it works is very similar to the mapping that we use for the plugin. Namely, you can create a template with certain properties, and then Tropy will look at the embedded metadata, and if it finds matching, or if those metadata fields are part of your template, then it will import them, and otherwise it will ignore them, basically. And so that's mostly EXIF and XMP metadata that we use this way. We also import JPEG comments, but they are very rarely used, I think, for real metadata. Yes, so some of this information should be imported automatically.
Thank you.
Other questions or feature suggestions for the Tropy folks?
I'm curious if the URL of the original manifest is stored anywhere in the metadata. After you've imported, is it possible to then remember or find out where that manifest came from?
At the moment, it's not possible because we import the downloaded file only. So unless it's encoded inside the in the file itself, then we don't really know. We've been considering adding a different version of the plugin where you can paste URLs of manifests and import it this way, and then yes, we could of course save the information.
I think in the demo it was part of the metadata, the identifier. I think it was a field.
Yes,
if it's part of the metadata, you have it.
Yes, if the ID of the JSON ID item matches the URL, then normally you should have it. That's true.
Maybe I will ask. Well, maybe I'll paste one link and bring it to folks' attention. So we have one of the IIIF community groups is now called our design community group. It was once called Discovery for Humans, about some of these issues, how people make use of and discover IIIF items, manifests, and materials. So I've just pasted a guide that group has generated called basically a guide to some persona work that they did based on a lot of interviewing and research with end users of manifest, but actually not just IIIF, image research in general. So that may be of interest to you all. And I guess I was thinking about that as you were kind of talking about the use cases. And I guess my question, if there's a specific thing you could point to, but was there, I guess I'm curious if there was an animating use case, if there was something that led specifically to the creation of the IIIF plugin, or was it just an accumulation of requests, say through, the discourse of the help board, or was there, like a particular, institution or use case? I'm just sort of curious about what led to this most recent development.
Yes, good question. I think we've been aware of IIIF from pretty much the beginning. I think the way that Tropy itself stores information, for example, rotations and filters, is basically has been taken, not taken, but has been inspired by the IIIF image API from the beginning, because we thought it would make sense, or one of the earliest approaches to Tropy was a client-server architecture. So the idea was to use IIIF for the server side. It only the technology possibilities changed with Electron, and we turned it into a desktop application in the end. But so the IIIF has always been part of Tropy internally a little bit. And then we were actually looking for ways to make it work together. And the manifest plugin is just one of the first situations where it sort of made sense. In the beginning, Tropy only had export plugins. Then we added the import plugin, and so it became one of the first ideas to write a plugin for IIIF manifests. One of the original ideas also was to make the API fully compliant to IIIF, but the reason this hasn't happened yet is simply because we thought that there's no real use case there, or there's no real benefit from doing that. So that's the relationship between Tropy and IIIF, I think, and hopefully it will become even more. There will be even more benefits of using it.
That's really helpful to hear. Yeah, thank you. Other questions that we can answer here? We got about 10 minutes left before the top of the hour. Or I'll put a different question. Any sort of a good chance to put in other feature requests or use cases you'd love to see? Obviously, Douglas pasted in the information earlier about how to get in touch. There's lots of ways to do that, but this is always a good opportunity if there's thank you for repasting that. So yeah, I guess last call for questions or suggestions for future development. Anything that people want to lodge here? Yeah, as we talk with this team. I see a rhetorical question. We won't put folks on the spot from Ben about. There's a long history in the IIIF community of finding clever ways to put in different I's and F's into plugin and product names. But yeah, we won't force you to answer that. All right, well then, I will take this opportunity just to say thank you once again to Douglas, Johannes, Sylvester. I really appreciate taking the time to do this demo. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. Glad to see the interest in this. Please do join us for future IIIF community calls. We'll put the recording in the notes document if you want to share that with colleagues or otherwise, and we'll put links to it in the newsletter as well. So with that, thank you all once again. Have a great day, and we'll see you online on IIIF Slack and elsewhere. Take care.
Thank you.